Newsfirst, Newsline.
Hello there, very good evening and welcome to another edition of Newsline. The Sri Lanka Telecom was the subject of controversy during the past few weeks. Actually, the past few months, since plans for domestic debt restructuring and SOE reforms were announced to the general public in Sri Lanka. However, in the midst of all of this chaos, there was the recent removal of the chairman of the Sri Lanka Telecom, who was replaced, of course, by his successor. And today, to discuss these matters and much more, we've got with us the former chairman of Sri Lanka Telecom, Rohan Fernando. He's a current board member of SLT. A very good evening and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shalan. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Mr. Fernando, now, your removal from the position of chairman of Sri Lanka Telecom wasn't just a simple removal. It was dubbed as an ousting of the chairman, something that wasn't expected, something that at least ethically is questionable to some extent, however legally valid in due course of law. So, Mr. Fernando, now there is this tendency, especially in Sri Lanka and among Sri Lanka's political elite or maybe even certain corporations, to say when they are removed from a position that this was the result of a coup. I was ousted, you know, this is all just a big, massive conspiracy. But what people fail to do is give an explanation. Even the economic crisis in Sri Lanka, there are many a politician who say that this is a conspiracy. This is a conspiracy of the West, this is a conspiracy of NGOs, but all of them fail to prove their point, present at least some form of evidence so that we can believe in what they are saying. So, Mr. Fernando, tell me, to start off with, why should we believe the fact that you were ousted from the position of chairman of the SLT and that it wasn't a simple, you know, corporate decision to remove you from chairman and appoint another person?
Shalan, to explain, actually I don't want to go into the legal part of it because it can trigger some other issues.
Okay.
Since I am a director on the board.
Okay.
My contention was it was a total surprise.
Okay.
It was not on the agenda, not even intimated to me, because usually the board appointments with regard to the shareholding of the government of Sri Lanka held by the secretary to the treasury is done by him. Even the letter of appointment and the nomination for chairman comes from the treasury. So I would have expected some form of intimation or request to step down or change of the board from the treasury secretary.
Okay.
And even before that, when I met the president several months ago, we had a one-to-one chat in his office. He never ever mentioned. He in fact said, I would like you to be a chairman of another organization, which I declined. And I was totally surprised when this move was made at the boardroom when I started the meeting. So it was more a surprise and some form of unexpected move, which I believe is not proper ethics or decorum in a corporate boardroom.
And then the fact that this is a state-owned enterprise makes it even more so unethical.
Precisely.
Is that what you're saying?
And I don't want to discuss the division because there's a minority stake held by the GTH. It's a company registered somewhere in Netherlands or Curacao. I'm not sure where it is registered. And of course, the other major shareholding of 49.4% held by the state of Sri Lanka, government of Sri Lanka. So as a result, I'm a bit cautious in declaring who voted and who did not vote. It might lead to some other maneuver or taking control of the company. So I leave it at that.
Okay.
So this shocked me, and the reason why I had a press briefing was I started getting calls. So I felt the best way Rather than answering and telling them to come, I called everybody, we'll discuss and I'll tell you what happened. You write the truth. Apart from that, I am not interested beyond that point. So that is where it is. I feel I have done my duty. And I took the mantle at the most difficult time during COVID. And then we had the economic downturn. And then we had Aragalia. All through that, the company survived. And the most importantly, the staff, number about 8,000 direct and altogether about 10,000 people engaged in the business with 27 unions, had utmost cooperation with the management during that last few years since 20.
Mr. Fernando, I understand the fact that you can't speak to these specifics, given the fact that you're still a director, you're a member of the board of directors of Sri Lanka Telecom, and as such you owe a responsibility and a certain level of confidentiality, of course, of the proceedings that go on at those closed door meetings. But in general, without going into the specifics of what really happened or why it really happened, why do you think this unexpected decision was taken by a majority of the members of the director board of Sri Lanka Telecom?
Well, when you say majority, there are only two parties representing in the board. That is the GTH and the government of Sri Lanka.
Okay.
So usually what happens, the government of Sri Lanka decides the which way to go, and naturally the other parties agree. So I presume this has come from the government of Sri Lanka, and it could not have happened without the knowledge of the president.
So, Mr. Fernando, just to put things into perspective now, it's a known fact that although several presidents in the past have attempted to bring some sort of formality into the appointment of chairman and other senior positions, especially to these state-owned enterprises, all of them have failed outright. I think President Gotabaya Rajapaksa also came to power with a pledge that he will establish a separate committee that will vet all appointments made to state-owned enterprises, especially the position of chairman, but that wasn't done. The usual practice of appointing political appointees, I mean, I do understand that it is a political appointment, but political appointees without the required qualifications or skill set to really run those institutions. So, Mr. Fernando, tell me, how is this different from, a change in a political appointee? How is it different?
Actually, to the term political appointee, I am not a political party
representative.
Not representative. Actually, I have never wanted to get involved in government business.
No, let me actually rephrase that. A person who the political authority at the time prefers over someone else.
Yes. So that's what I want. I understand your point. That would be the general perception among the people. So you are articulating that. I very much understand, appreciate. In my case, I am a Sri Lankan and I very much love the country and I will do anything for the country, but without getting involved in politics as at now. Now when the government changed, I know President Rajapaksa appointed the committee. I think Diane Gomez and several people were there.
But that didn't really function, did it?
I think they appointed some people like Susanta Ratnayaka to the BOI, then Nushad Pereira to CWE. I think none of them could last for too long because of the political interference again. Okay.
Now, so there was absolutely no point in vetting these people and putting proper people into these positions, because once they are appointed to those positions, the political interferences just doesn't allow them to move forward.
Yes. I can't speak for everybody, but this is what I have heard.
There are a majority of cases.
And in my case, I have always been talking about the tea industry. That's my, the main focus was tea industry, and I've been telling the president in some of these forums that tea industry is a $5 billion industry. In fact, I have come on to this channel and articulated my vision for the tea industry, and why don't we go for that $5 billion export economy in tea. So when he got elected, he ran and said, why don't you take over the tea board chairmanship. I said, sir, I cannot take over chairmanship, but I also have a tea company. So it will be a terrible conflict of interest.
Right.
So I cannot take. Then much later, he rang and said, can you take over SLT and run? The second time I couldn't say no to the president. I said,
So this was President Rajapaksa?
President Rajapaksa
Okay.
personally rang me. That's how I came to be the chairman of SLT. What I brought to the table, not technology, because we have enough technologically advanced people in SLT, 600 engineers, technicians. What I brought in, a different perspective of taking SLT to the next level, to become one of the best companies in Sri Lanka. In fact, our vision was to make SLT the number one company corporate in Sri Lanka. Right. How? With just 4 principles to eradicate corruption, not reduce, eradicate corruption.
At SLT?
At SLT. Then improve efficiency and reduce wastage and inclusive management. These are the only 4 pillars that I brought in to talk to these people, and I gave leadership, how we can amalgamate some of these things, then synchronize, converge, because SLT was all over the place. There were so many subsidiaries they have set up.
Just like the CEB?
Well, yes. They had a university they had started, which has cost about $1 billion in losses to the company. We wound up and sold the business. Then we had a taxi company, SLT Move, which was not a vertical at all, which has consumed about several hundred millions. We wound up. Then there was a Sky Network, so many non-yielding businesses, as well as a manpower agency having nearly 2,000 people to supply manpower.
To the SLT itself?
SLT itself. So these are the things I said, look, we have to bring everything. Then SLT and Mobitel were running as separate entities. When they could have easily come together, and I heard that a lot of people tried, they failed. So we brought that together. Now that's why we now have one thread, SLT Mobitel. And all the other verticals are dependent, run on this thread of SLT. That is my skill in branding, but that is what I have done in the tea industry, building Heladi as a global brand, which is now sold in nearly 40 countries. So I am proud to say I have some knowledge, a little bit more knowledge in brand building. So I just gave my ideas, leadership, not management. I didn't get involved in management. Of course, I used to talk to them, go with them, visit the regions, encourage them to work together, encourage them not to fight against the management. I think when I look back, I achieved those targets. So having done that, that is why I say I am not a political henchman. I came to do a job on the request of the Honorable His Excellency the President, without taking a salary or unlimited perks the previous chairman were entitled to.
So just before we cross over to a short commercial break, one short question now. Do you think that your removal from the position of chairman of SLT was because your vision for the company or the path that you envisaged for the company was not really the path that you said two parties are involved in making management decisions at SLT, is not really the path that either the government or the private investor at SLT wanted the company to take? Do you think that's the reason? Could we sum it up like that?
I am still baffled as to why it happened. There are a lot of questions are being asked from me about the privatization, and then certain other parties interested in this company. So without any evidence on the table, I am unable to make any. But I think I leave it to the investigating journalists to deep dive into this, and I'm sure they can get a lot of information and place it before the country.
We'll cross over to a short commercial break. Just like you mentioned, I think the talk of the town among the general public, at least, on this topic of the SLT is the, at least, notice of intention to privatize the SLT even more than it is already privatized, to sell shares of SLT, a profit-making institution that the government owns a majority of the shares currently, but they want to change that status quo. We'll discuss on this matter after this short commercial break. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Newsline.
Newsfirst, Newsline.
US University report states that China's next overseas military base is likely a Sri Lankan port. Tear gas fired at a protest. Journalist Tharindu Uduwaragedara arrested. Health Secretary speechless over the health crisis. Trade unions question what would happen to the July funds of the suspended benefit programs. Crudia zelenica tree that was uprooted by a cabinet decision exhumed as per court order.
Newsfirst.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsline. We're in discussion with Mr. Rohan Fernando, the former chairman of Sri Lanka Telecom. Mr. Fernando, we were discussing about the major concern, at least among the people of Sri Lanka, on the privatization of SOEs. Now, I think it's an accepted fact, and people in Sri Lanka now understand better than ever that there are certain SOEs in Sri Lanka that have been bleeding taxpayer rupees in the billions. In the billions of dollars, unfortunately. But Sri Lanka Telecom is not a state-owned enterprise like that. So when the Sri Lankan government announced the privatization of Sri Lankan Airlines, the CEB, many other institutions like that, there wasn't too much of a pushback from the general public or even from the political opposition, the other leadership in this country. But when plans were announced to privatize SLT, which is an already private public partnership, even more, sell more shares and lose the government majority control at SLT, there were serious concerns raised. Do you think this is a good move?
Shalan, the way I look at privatization, I am a firm believer that government should not be in business. That's principle number one.
Okay.
Wherever the government get into business, the whole system has failed. Look at the CWE, very good example. They won't allow others to do business and they also have failed in the business. So, similarly, the government's involvement in business entities has to be curtailed, controlled, or pushed back to a more monetary and governing role.
Regulatory role.
Regulatory role. Now, when it comes to SLT, SLT is already a privatized company.
Yes.
His shares are quoted in the stock market and is a very healthy share right now, despite the fact it's an illiquid share, just only about 5%, less than 5% shares on the trading floor.
Okay.
Now, I cannot understand why the government, if they want to sell their shares, cannot do it on the flow of the stock market, subject to TRC control or supervisory role on its sensitivity areas, and without going through all this, discussion about restructuring, finding buyers. It can be done easily on the Colombo Stock Exchange.
Yes.
But all shareholders have a right to sell their shares on the Colombo Stock Exchange. That is what the Colombo Stock Exchange, the stock market is all about. So this is question number one I have. Then of course I have always maintained, in fact I have told the President also, that when it comes to SLT, there are certain sensitivities that we need to take into account. For instance, how we operate the cyberspace.
Right.
Now cyberspace, AI, are things that has raised the concern of the most powerful nations like the US, Germany, Russia, China. They're all very much concerned about how the cyberspace can be used to disrupt people, to data mine, finding information about people, and of course regime change. We have seen it during the Arab Spring. The social media was at the forefront in getting the people onto the streets, in creating that mayhem in Egypt, which finally spread to Tunisia, Yemen, and of course their final aim, General Muammar Gaddafi, is somebody I admire, though he's a dictator, because he was planning to bloom the desert, make the desert green, using that aquifers and that great man-made river, which was touted as the 8th wonder of the world, and that was finished there. So this cyberspace has to be protected under any circumstances. So I believe that the country should have proper cyber security act passed in parliament. Not only the act, the government must have regulations to implement the act as also a far-reaching, overreaching authority in control of the cyber space of this country. So in most countries, this kind of areas are also connected to the defense ministries. We can take lessons from a small country like Israel. Now Israel has systems where they control the cyberspace very effectively, because I think that's one country, they're always under the enemy threat and survived. So I'm sure we have now diplomatic relationships with Israel. We can get information. Japan, some of the developed countries. I think recently President Biden issued the largest budget allocation for cybersecurity activities. So I think we have to take lessons from these countries and first secure our cyberspace. That is one area I believe is for concern. I'm sure the government is aware of it. I hope they are working on it, and I hope the new chairman, I wish him all the best to take it forward. This is a very good company, and within this framework, if they are discussing the sale, then to take this into account for the greater good of the nation.
So the point that you raised earlier, a lot of state-owned enterprises are being privatized, and many of them are not being sold on the stock exchange. Individual buyers or individual investors, foreign investors, large global conglomerates are being hand-picked, sought after. Not even a tender process is being followed. It's more like one of those emergency purchases, spot purchase kind of things. I think you can allude this situation to that.
Unsolicited
Unsolicited bids. Yes, exactly. So I think Sri Lanka has seen the damage that these emergency purchases or unsolicited bids can do to a nation when proper procedures, accepted procedures aren't followed, when there is a latent or patent lack of transparency. Moving forward, with the SOEs in Sri Lanka being privatized, do you think many of them will be sold to these individual investors, or do you think the government is also considering, or to the best of your knowledge, do you at least think the government is considering maybe listing some of these entities on the stock exchange and allowing the people of Sri Lanka to own these entities?
You see, Sharon, that's the one way to attract investment is to have stable policies in the country and a strong legal system. Rather than taking 10 years to resolve a problem, you must have a proper commercial court where legal cases are, heard expeditiously, so that the investors' rights are protected. I think we lack that to a great extent. Ease of doing business index, I think we are very much below the required level for such good investors to come. I always take Israel. They are the innovative IT nation it's becoming the IT nation of the innovation. All the top tech companies have operations in Israel. Why won't they come to Sri Lanka? I believe because we don't have stable policies. When governments change, policies change. And the governments now change more often than before. The same people,
even before their term ends now.
Before their term ends, same people come from different parties, and they do the same thing over and over again, expecting and promising a different result. I think this is that Einstein philosophy, lunacy. Am I right? Einstein said if you do the same thing over and over again
and expect a different result,
it's called the lunacy. So we are working on the Einstein philosophy in taking the country forward. Now, if it comes to our SOEs, there are quite a lot of SOEs with lot of real assets, real estate. Selling is, you buy something and sell. I am not talking of selling. I think the restructuring. I think last year I was talking in some shows, I said we have to restructure the SOEs. When you restructure the SOEs, you analyze its balance sheet, then your business value and the cash flow. And then in divesting, you can get good investors to come locally or from foreign countries. But of course, we have to vet the investors. But these are government property, state assets belonging to the people of Sri Lanka. You can't just sell it. You must have a very transparent system of analyzing who is coming for what. Are they coming to, we have had a lot of people coming from various places, I think, bringing black money to Sri Lanka and, laundering their money. I mean, we have heard about it before. So
and it's happened. I think there's proof on record that this has happened.
So we have to ensure that it won't happen again. And now you take some of these major entities. These can be easily run profitably if you restructure and get investment. Now, if the government is worried, if the people are worried, government can do what they did with the plantation sector in privatizing. They can hold the golden share. So they don't get involved in management, but they get the dividend from business. And in case of anything that will threaten the national interest, the government can intervene. So that is what the golden share means. I think they implemented this at the time of re-privatizing the plantation sector.
Right.
The earlier plantation sector was a burden on the exchequer. Today, I think government is getting dividends and government is getting some form of tax from the section. So they can do a similar model for the other SOEs. So that is why I don't believe in the selling part, because selling can lead to unsolicited offers and we will not know what happened. Sometimes the machinery can be sold as scrap metal and that will be the end of that industry. And some people will go very happily because they have understood that when they bought, for what they paid, stocks already existed in the system.
And someone in the middle of all of this, someone is in the end of the day lining their own pockets. I think quite pertinent what you said about Einstein's theory of lunacy. So we've run out of time on this show, but thank you very much, Mr. Rohan Fernando, former chairman of the SLT and current board member of the SLT, for joining us on our program and clearing out some of these ambiguities, at least, surrounded your removal. I don't think you did a very great job in clearing out the ambiguities, and I think that is as a result of your current position as a member of the executive board of SLT. But of course, as time passes by, I think you will be able to give us more and more details of what is really happening inside the SLT, what Sri Lanka's future holds, or what the future holds for SLT. So I think the biggest takeaway from this is, let's not try to do the same things that we did in the past and expect a different result, lest we all end up lunatics. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. God bless.
Thank you, Shalan.
Do you think if an election is held now, you all will have the same momentum and